So welcome everybody to the workshop today, which is on managing exam stress. As I said, it's designed to be for parents and carers as well as young people themselves. My name's Hope Westgate and I'm a clinical psychologist in the Psychology in Schools team. And Linda, do you want to introduce yourself?
I am Linda Brindle. I'm a senior psychotherapist also in the Psychology in Schools team.
Great. And we both work within NSFT, which is the Norfolk Suffolk Foundation Trust in the NHS. So thank you for everyone that's come along today. We will aim to finish around about 7 and it takes around about an hour. So let's have just a brief look at what we're going to be covering in today's workshop. So we're going to look at what we mean by stress, because it's something that we probably hear quite often, and just thinking a little bit about what happens when someone becomes stressed, what the stress response is. And then I guess a lot of the focus is going to be about how to manage stress, but particularly thinking about when it's coming up with tests and exams. So we'll go through a few kind of top tips or easy wins, if you like, for things that you can do both in the run up to exams, but also on exam day. Thinking within that about rewards and motivation, which is really important. A lot of this information should be really helpful for you yourself if you're a young person facing an exam soon, but also hopefully there's some key information and we've got some top tips for parents to also hold in mind. So I'll be covering more of the first half and Linda will be covering more of the second half. Okay, so this is a Slido question where it's just open answer, so anything that comes to mind really around this question. What do you notice in yourself when you hear the word test or exam? So even if you're a parent or carer, you can think about this for yourself. Just what are your kind of associations with the word test or exam? What happens to you? Imagine if tomorrow someone told you you're going to be tested on something, whether you were at school and it was related to schoolwork, or whether you were at work and it's related to that context. What do you notice happening in yourself if you imagine someone talking about a test coming up or exam? Great, I can see a few people writing. So not looking for any one answer here, it's just some of your thoughts. It's got a fear and irritation, panic, stress, anxiety, getting nervous, nervousness, worried. So you can already see there's lots of themes in people's initial reactions around anxiety, nervousness. Going straight to thinking I'm going to fail. So that's maybe you notice your thoughts, making negative predictions, trying to work out what you're going to do. How can I manage or prioritize this? I've got a lot going on already. So people may start going into problem solving about how am I going to work this out? Great, we've got a lovely range of answers here. So maybe some physical sensations that you're noticing, like your heart rate raising, or tension in your body, feeling pressure. Annoyed, yeah, it may not just be anxiety, it may be annoyed. I think someone said irritable earlier. Lots of different feelings could come up. Yeah, I've got more kind of physical things, breathlessness, increased heart rate, panic, I won't get the revision done in time. Yeah, so kind of thinking about how you're going to prepare. And again, maybe thinking more of those, noticing more of those negative thoughts that I'm not going to be able to prepare. Feeling nervous or thinking I'll forget what I know. That's a really, really common one that comes up in test situations. And also that with all of these different feelings, someone's put overwhelmed, which I guess is really quite expected if there's lots of these different thoughts and feelings going around, feeling overwhelmed. Or rebellious. Yeah, it may be that when someone says that word, we have a natural instinct to rebel and actually say, I'm not doing that, or avoiding it altogether, which can be a common one. Thank you. The reason I asked you to do this is just to, if you're not a young person, you haven't got a test coming up, just to be able to put yourself in their shoes for a little bit and think about what our natural reaction is. And I think it's fair to say the large majority of people really don't like sitting in a test or an exam. It's really quite anxiety provoking. So all of these things shows that we can all in some way relate to that experience of having a test or an exam and it really being quite a difficult one. So thank you for doing that. We'll move on. So I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but it's just useful to note what we mean by stress. As I said, it gets brought up in everyday language all the time. We often talk about being stressed. And I guess the dictionary definition is around mental strain resulting from some demanding circumstance. So essentially, when we think about stress, it's that kind of strain, and often people talk about there being a bit of a discrepancy between the demands that are placed upon us and the resources we have to meet those demands. So, for example, with exams, it may be that there's lots of exams or lots of material to learn, and people maybe don't feel they have enough time, or maybe don't feel confident in knowing that subject well. And I guess the other really important thing to say about stress is it is made up of multiple components, and it's both kind of a physical and emotional thing that we'll get on to. But it's really helpful to, when someone says they're stressed, to kind of find out more about that. What do they mean, and what are the specific things they're feeling stressed about? And the other thing just to say before we move on is around difference between stress and anxiety, and obviously both can come up. But with stress, often after the stressor has passed, that stress is resolved. So, for example, after the exam has passed, that stress goes away. Whereas with kind of chronic anxiety, that anxiety would still be lingering around even if the stressor had passed as such. So this is just kind of a brief outline really of what we mean by stress. And you may just kind of think about for yourself, what's the meaning of stress for you or your young person? So something that people are sometimes surprised to hear is actually stress isn't a completely bad thing. It can be a good thing even in some occasions. And actually, we all need a little bit of stress in our lives. So feeling stressed is a really natural response to challenging situations. And actually, a certain amount of it can be good for us. And I guess in life, there's always going to be times where we experience slightly challenging situations, whether that's a test, an exam, or something else. So actually, it's almost impossible to avoid stress our entire lives. So actually, having some experiences of having a little bit of stress in our lives, in some ways, can actually build resilience, and be helpful for people to experience, because when you experience it, you can start to learn about yourself, what is helpful, what are your coping strategies, and you also can start to build confidence in yourself that even when I face something challenging or something stressful, I can manage it, I can cope with it. So that there is a helpful part to it. And also sometimes it gives us some advantages. So for example, when people are stressed, they say that their motivation increases. And if if stress was zero, actually, often people say that that really negatively impacts their motivation. So if someone had no stress whatsoever around tests or exams, then their problem is that actually they don't feel motivated to do it. So actually having some stress can help people prepare and have that motivation. It can also sometimes give people a little burst of energy, which may be helpful in stressful circumstances. Even when it comes to exams, people will often say, on the exam day, they can actually write a little bit more than they can when they're preparing. And that's the extra kind of energy and adrenaline that they have when they're feeling stressed. So it can come with some advantages. And as I said, it is really common. So when you go and sit in an exam in that exam hall, the large majority of people around you will have experienced stress at some point leading up to that day or on that day. So it's really just important to know that it is a really difficult experience, but it is very common, and you're likely not going to be the only one experiencing that. So I've mentioned that stress does have a kind of physical component to it. and that's related to the release of adrenaline when people are stressed. So this adrenaline results in what we call the fight, flight, or freeze response. So our body is essentially preparing us to deal with the stressor in some way by getting out of the situation, kind of preparing the body to fight in that situation or freeze. So this is a bit of a survival response that we've evolved, and that's because when you're feeling stressed, the kind of brain and body detects it as a threat. So it's trying to give you lots of physical symptoms to help you survive in that situation. And that adrenaline gets pumping around your system. So you can see in the picture, there's lots of different physical symptoms associated with stress. And some people mentioned it in Slido as well. So noticing things like the rapid heartbeat, breathing changing, trembling. Maybe tummy aches or flushed skin. So lots of different things can happen, and that's just related to the adrenaline response. So it's not kind of dangerous in itself, that's just the body's way of responding to it. And as I said on the previous slide, some stress can be good for us, and even some of the physical symptoms can give us a little bit boost in energy. But actually, when that stress kind of gets really high, if it gets too intense, actually that can negatively impact us. So for example, if those physical symptoms become really intense, it can be quite uncomfortable. And if we're experiencing that kind of high stress state quite regularly and chronically, again, that can impact on our health and well-being. So we know some stress can be good, and feeling a little bit of stress may be helpful or provide an advantage, but actually there's a limit, and at some point it can get too much and start to negatively impact on our health and well-being. So the key task is noticing where your stress is, whether it's building, and trying to kind of keep it in balance. Realistically, we're not going to completely get rid of these stresses, but trying to kind of keep it at a balanced and manageable level, I guess, is the aim, so that we can kind of carry on doing what's important for us, for example, sitting exams. So this picture is just really to kind of flag up that stress does come up in many situations outside of exams, and in lots of kind of everyday situations. So you know, athletes will often talk about stress coming up for them in preparation and on the day of competition, and different ways that they try and utilize it or manage it. What you may notice is it comes up even with things that you actually find quite fun. So we've got a gaming picture there. Yeah, I don't know if you game a lot, but when you're doing a competition or something like that, you may really want to win, and that creates a bit of stress in you immediately. You can see it on the TV competitions and cooking competitions. People often relate to being stressed. So I guess the message is, you know, it is quite common, but also stress is often linked to things that are important to us. So we get stressed when something actually is quite meaningful or important to us. So it can be helpful just to notice that and remind ourselves that although it can feel unpleasant, it's because it's something that matters. And it is something that people will have had experience with multiple times in their life before. So we're going to think about the different multiple components that are when it comes to stress, and particularly how they relate to stress building around exams and tests. But just to think to yourself around these questions on the slide here, so you may be thinking about this for yourself, or if you're a parent or carer for your young person. So just to think through, what are your signs of stress? Do you maybe notice some of those physical signs that we talked about linked to that adrenaline response? Do you notice any of the thoughts that passed your mind? And particularly, are there any negative or unhelpful thoughts that come up? What do you do in response to stress? Do you avoid it? Do you try and problem solve or approach it in a different way? And lots of people will do different things. So this is why it's just a bit of a moment to think about yourself. Does it show up in other emotions? As we talked about, it may be that it comes out in anger or irritability. And do other people know that you're stressed? Is there certain kind of signs that you're stressed, or actually are you someone that holds it to yourself and other people wouldn't know? So if you are a young person watching this, it's really helpful to discuss these things with someone in your house, like a parent, for example, to help kind of really think about, how do I know when I'm stressed? Because the first thing really to do is just notice where that stress level is and when it's building, because when we notice it, we can try and support it as soon as possible. So that's kind of the first key task, really, is just thinking about, how does stress show for you? What are the signs, and how can I help someone notice it in me? How can I help notice it myself? So now let's think about all of those different components of stress. So as I said, there's lots of different parts to stress, and actually some of the things that we naturally do to try and help ourselves when stress comes up, to manage it, actually can keep it going or even make it worse sometimes. So I'm just going to talk through some specific components that you may notice related to stress, particularly in exams. And I noticed in the Slido that people had started to note some unhelpful or negative thinking patterns that they have when they become stressed, which is really, really common. So you may notice thoughts around fearing the worst. I won't be able to manage exams. I'm going to fail everything. Our brains are really good at catastrophizing, and particularly when we're already feeling stressed or anxious. It may be that you notice thoughts around yourself, like, I can't cope, this is unmanageable, I'm not going to be able to do this. Again, really common thoughts that come up with stress and anxiety, and are really quite difficult to hold. These are not pleasant thoughts to have. And understandably, they're going to make you feel more stressed or anxious. So if you look at the feelings box there, we've got lots of different feelings that you yourselves noticed on Slido as well. So feeling anxious, nervous, panicky, full of dread. These are all quite common experiences, but again, you can see why actually some of those can be quite overwhelming as well. And there really is a clear link between the thoughts that we have and our feelings, and that relationship goes both ways. So how we're thinking is going to affect how we feel, but likewise, how we feel is also going to skew our thinking a little bit, and often makes it more negative. And those physical sensations that come alongside the feelings related to that adrenaline response. And this could be different for different people, as we mentioned, whether it's kind of breathing rate changing, heart rate changing, or sweating. It can be quite unpleasant and uncomfortable for people. And then behaviours is around what people do in response to some of these thoughts, feelings, physical sensations that they're having. And for some people, it may be that they kind of avoid revision altogether. And again, this kind of makes sense if it's something that we're feeling stressed or anxious about. That's actually a really kind of typical response. And I think someone noticed on Slido feeling rebellious as well. That can be quite typical. And it doesn't mean that we don't care about something when we're avoiding it. Actually, sometimes it becomes so overwhelming that seems to be the thing that helps people cope in the moment, is just avoiding it. Or it may be that people go the other way and actually are studying constantly, spending so much of their lives doing kind of preparation and exam prep, and missing out on lots of other stuff as well, which equally can be unhelpful. For example, it can lead to people feeling a bit burnt out. Or it may be that people are just constantly seeking reassurance. It may be that if you're a young person, you feel the need to kind of check in with your parent or your teacher quite often around how you're doing. So a lot of the things that we all naturally probably can relate to and do in response to stress and exams actually keep that cycle going, reinforce it. So if we're burnt out, we may feel like we can't cope. If we're avoiding the revision, we may feel even more so that we're going to fail. So it's just helpful to think about what this cycle looks like for you, or if you're a parent and carer for your young person, what it may look like. I know you may not know exactly what it looks like for your child. And just to think about how you naturally respond, because I guess if we're thinking about how to manage exam related stress, we need to think about exits out of this cycle. So that includes things like, how can we manage those thoughts that we know are typically going to come up? What can we do when they come up? Or are there certain things that we can do just to keep those feelings or physical sensations a little bit more tolerable? Or are there certain things that we can do differently, which are going to help exit this cycle? So in terms of the rest of the presentation, a lot of what we say actually really connects to this cycle, and finding ways to exit it in different ways. Okay, so now we're going to go through some of the kind of key things to hold in mind in terms of managing exam-related stress. So we'll go through each of the components on the screen at the moment, and hopefully some of this will give you some new ideas, and some of it may kind of reinforce what you're already doing or what you're already supporting your young person to do. Okay, so just to begin with, we've got this very short YouTube clip called Conquering Exam Stress Lessons from Our Bodies, which you can get on YouTube. But it just summarizes a little bit of what I've said, and is just a really nice clip on some of the really helpful basic things to hold in mind. So fingers crossed the sound will work, and we'll give a go at playing it.
Exams are stressful, but stress doesn't have to take over your life. If we understand the science of how it works, we can make it work for us. When faced with a potentially stressful situation, angry parents, driving tests, or, yes, exams, the danger sensor in our brains, the amygdala, is activated. This alerts the nearby hypothalamus, sending a long-range message via the pituitary gland to the adrenal glands, which secrete the hormones adrenaline and cortisol into our body. Adrenaline increases our blood flow, speeding up our reflexes and sharpening our senses, and cortisol releases glucose, giving our body vital extra energy. This response, known as fight or flight, is our body's way of preparing us to tackle big challenges. But when stress levels get too intense, they can trigger negative symptoms, like difficulty focusing, tension headaches, nausea, and disturbed sleep. The good news is, scientists are working hard to figure out how we can keep our stress response balanced and healthy. Some cultures have used slow breathing to aid relaxation for centuries, and now scientists think they know why. Inhale, now exhale slowly. When we slowly exhale, the signals that control our heart rate are altered, making our heart beat more slowly, and a reduced heart rate helps us relax. Another trick is exercise. When we exercise, our bodies release feel-good chemicals that work in the same way as painkillers do, lifting our mood, reducing anxiety, and helping us to sleep. And sleep is especially important before exams because it helps reduce stress even more. Another area that scientists are investigating is socializing. Believe it or not, locking yourself away in your room for weeks on end is not good exam preparation. When revising, we should make some time to hang out with friends and family, as socializing is a scientifically proven relaxation booster. Scientists have been looking at our close cousins, chimpanzees, for evidence. When they tested chimps' urine, they found that levels of stress hormones were much lower when they'd been spending time with their chimp friends than when they'd been alone. And it seems the same is true for us. So, as your exams get closer, remember, a little bit of stress is no bad thing. Just follow our simple tips and you can take control, getting the right balance that works for you.
Great. So that's a really nice video just to kind of summarize some of the essentials when we think about managing exam stress. So we've just got a little bit of a summary on this next page around some of the things that were mentioned in that video. So I won't kind of go over all of these as they were just mentioned, but I guess the important thing to say here is that we know that some of these things that we're talking about now, like exercise and eating well, are quite obvious, and we kind of all know that we need to do them. But it becomes quite difficult actually in practice to put them in when we're particularly stressed. Sometimes they just completely go out the window because we're so focused on something else. So I think it's just important not to neglect some of those really basic essentials that we all need in our lives, whether we're stressed or not. And if they're already embedded in there, then it's going to be a little bit easier to manage any stresses that come up. So that includes things like looking at your eating patterns and diet, and actually the brain needs fuel to work. So for its cognitive capacity, it's really important to keep eating regular healthy meals as well, to have the fuel it needs, as well as things like keeping active, as the video mentioned. And we get lots of physical responses to stress, so that's one way to help kind of manage them and deal with them. And keeping active doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be an exercise class, it could be going out for a walk, but it could even be doing something when someone's at the desk for a 1-minute break. They could do a desk-based activity where they try and use lots of energy. So you can be really creative with these things, and sometimes they could take a matter of 1 minute. As mentioned in the video as well, around socializing and connecting with others, it's really easy to stop doing that entirely when people are caught up with something, but as human beings we kind of need that connection, so making sure that that's still on the agenda. And also sleep, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more because it wasn't particularly mentioned, but we know that sleep often gets brought up as a challenge when people are stressed, but particularly around exams as well. So I'll talk about relaxation in a moment, but I guess thinking about revision and exams, often people will say that they're cramming things in before bed or working up late, which we know does happen. And some people feel like they work best that way, but the difficulty with this is that the brain remains really active when it's going to sleep. If it's gone straight from revision trying to go to sleep, it's really hard for the brain to shut off. So kind of as a general tip, we would say to really make sure there isn't revision immediately before sleep if it can be helped, and that's really important, as well as some of the general things that we know aren't helpful just before bed, like no phones and bright screens. Again, that can interact with our ability to sleep. It interacts with the sleep hormones that are important for us. Also, thinking about having at least an hour before bed to have some wind down time. So rather than revising, doing something that's really relaxing. So it could be that people use more of a formal relaxation exercise. So that may be, for example, a breathing technique, or a kind of relaxation music or guide. There's lots of things on YouTube and apps and things like that these days. So it may be trying to find a formal relaxation exercise that you can get on with. But it also includes doing just generally relaxing activities. So I guess what we'd call more informal relaxation. So that may be just sitting down and having a chat with the sibling or parent. It may be having a bath, or doing something slightly creative. It could be all sorts of things, and I'm not going to say what they are because it could be different for different people, but just thinking about what kind of relaxes you or your young person, and making sure that that's embedded before going to sleep. The other thing is that people will say that because their brain is so active, that when they're trying to sleep, then they'll suddenly have these thoughts of, oh, I need to remember this fact, or I've got this revision I need to be doing. Again, it's really normal. The brain's trying to kind of process its day and trying to help you out, but it can be really unhelpful for sleep. So sometimes people find it helpful just to have a notepad or something next to their bed, so that if their brain suddenly comes up with these things when they're trying to sleep or in the middle of the night, they can note it down, so they can actually tell their brain, you don't need to hold on to it anymore. I've got it down. When my alarm goes off in the morning, I can relook at that. So it's a way just to kind of get whatever it is out of their brain, and then refocus and say, right now is my time for sleep. Similarly, on this note, it can be really tricky when someone's bedroom is also the room that they revise in, and there's those kind of associations of learning. So trying to find ways to kind of create a separate environment. It may be putting away any signs of revision or laptops before bed. or creating clear reminders that right now is sleep time and I can get back to doing that the next day. So these are just a few kind of top tips around sleep and exams, but we do have another webinar specifically around sleep, and you can get that on YouTube via the NSFT channel. So if that's a problem area for you or your young person, that would be something to follow up from. So just thinking about activities that are relaxing. So just have a think about this. How do you or how does your child relax and have fun? So if you're a young person on this call, what do you do to have fun? What's relaxing for you? If you're a parent or carer, then think about what's relaxing for my child. What do they enjoy doing? Because this is going to be really important when thinking about managing stress, is also thinking about what are the things that actually don't cause stress, what are the positive things going on in their life, or how do they have fun. And I expect we'll probably have a few different ideas coming up, and that's because it's an individual thing. So we've got things like music, meditation, talking to friends, movies, a few people, music, reading, spending time with a book. Someone's mentioned cat and someone's mentioned pet, and that does come up a lot actually. Often people will say that they find just being around their pets really helpful, sometimes even just talking to their pets or cuddling their pets. Yeah. Meeting with friends, playing football. So it may be a particular sport, or just going out and being active in some way, kicking a ball around. Maybe different creative activities. We've got crafts, we've got baking as well. Going for a walk. Yeah, so it may be some kind of activity or just getting outside, reading, dog, YouTube. Got a few people saying baking. This is a word cloud, so the more people that say it, the bigger the writing will come up. Great, thank you for everyone that's logged on and contributing, calling friends. So you can see there's a wide range of different things that people may find relaxing, and it's really helpful to hold these in mind for yourself in terms of what are the activities that I really enjoy or I find really relaxing, or holding them in mind for your young person. So keep that in mind as we go on to the next slide. So what can be really important is just to think about those things that you find relaxing. And often people say when they're really stressed, they don't have time to do those things. And that is what it feels like. And that's where that pressure comes in. But actually, sometimes that is just the time to think about making sure those activities are in your life. And we know that as something like exams approach, your balance may not be quite equal. And I guess that's to be expected as you get closer and closer to an exam. For example, it may be that slightly more of your time is taken up by schoolwork and revision than it is having fun. But what we don't want to happen is it to completely be one or the other. So getting some kind of balance, whatever that balance is for yourself. But we do know if it's kind of complete revision or complete work and none of those things that you enjoy or you find relaxing, it can get more overwhelming, and people can just get kind of burnt out with the stress. And actually, people say when they get to that point, when they're revising, they're not always taking it in anyway. So it is important not to exclude those fun things, even if you're just doing them for a really small part of your week, and thinking in advance about planning them in as well. So people often talk about planning a bit of a revision timetable, or plans around when they're going to do work, but also to plan in when you're going to have breaks, and even what you're going to do in those breaks, so that actually when you do have breaks, they get used in a really helpful way, rather than, for example, being swallowed up by something else, or going on our phones and social media, which is really easy to get sucked into. Whether you can have some plans already in there, so you know that when I'm not doing this, I am able to do those things that I find fun or enjoyable, and that in itself should really help conquer some of that stress, and balance it out a little bit. So absolutely, that is a vital thing to consider when managing lots of stress. So I'm just going to discuss a concept referred to as automatic pilot. I don't know if you've ever noticed that maybe you've had a shower and you can't actually really remember the different steps you took in that shower because your mind was elsewhere. Or perhaps you've walked the dog somewhere and you can't even remember the exact route you went. Maybe it was a familiar route and you got from A to B, but actually when you look back, you can't remember each of those steps. You can't really remember what you saw along the way. And this often happens when we're in what's called automatic pilot mode. So we're actually doing one activity, but our mind's elsewhere. And it's, the mind has evolved to be able to do this, and it's really clever in some respect that it can do that. It can almost be two places at once. But it's also quite unhelpful in lots of ways, because when we're in automatic pilot mode, often we're kind of going over something that's happened or thinking about a future task that we need to do. So actually we're kind of carrying some of those stresses around with us, which is really, really unhelpful. So we want to be able to notice when this is happening and move away from it. So just to kind of demonstrate what we mean by this, just to do a really quick activity, maybe just 30 seconds right now. We're going to do an activity where we just pay attention to something in the present moment, a focused task. So what I want you to do is just notice any kind of circles in your environment. So you may notice what's on the screen here, notice all the circles that you can see, but feel free to get up and move around. So what can you notice in the room? And I want you to really pay attention to those circles. So deliberate focus attention. Please do it as I'm talking, just noticing all the different circles in your room right now. And you may do this task quite slowly, deliberately. You may start in one specific area and zoom out a little bit. So you're just noticing the circles. I'm not going to give loads of time for this, so just a few more seconds. So you probably won't get around to noticing every circle in your room, but even if you're just focused on one area, noticing all the circles. Okay, and if you bring your attention back to me. So that was a really short demonstration, but what I was doing there was just trying to get you to pay attention in the present moment to something. And what you may have noticed when doing that, even in that short time, your brain may have wandered or try to think, what am I being asked to do here? Or why am I doing this? Or maybe thinking about the thing that you need to do after this workshop finishes. And the brain does that. It often will kind of go off, and the task is to try and refocus it back on the present moment. So just to think about that exercise a little bit more, and what we were doing. So that exercise was essentially a kind of form of mindfulness, and this may be something that you've heard before. And essentially mindfulness is about bringing our attention to the here and now and not getting stuck in the past or future. So if we go on to the next slide, you can see that this picture is a lovely illustration, really. Often our minds can be very full of lots of different things that we need to do, and lots of different stresses. But when we're talking about being mindful, we're talking about actually letting our mind actually just focus on what's in front of us, what is in the here and now. And it means that when we're doing this, we allow thoughts, feeling and sensations to come and go, and just kind of keep focused on the present. So research tells us that actually using these kind of skills and having more time devoted to being mindful and paying attention to the present moment can be really helpful for stress management. But it's something that we need to kind of develop over time. It's not helpful to just do it when we're really, really stressed, but actually to be able to do this in our everyday lives, because we spend so much of our lives in that kind of more automatic pilot mode. So having times that you can just be a bit more mindful. So let's think about just kind of practical examples where you could do that a little bit. So I mentioned some examples where you may be an automatic pilot, but actually you can deliberately do those activities in a really mindful way. For example, in the shower, really noticing what that shower feels like. You may just focus on one sense or lots of different senses. So you may focus on things like the temperature, the pressure. You may focus on what you can hear, what you can see, the steps that you're taking in that shower. So it can really be done with any activity, walking to school or walking the dog or brushing your teeth. But trying to create these moments in our everyday lives can be really helpful. So actually we are having a break from constantly thinking about things that we're having to do. And it also trains our minds a little bit in trying to redirect our attention when it kind of keeps going back to something that's unhelpful, to redirect it to something that's in the present. So we do have some resources at the end, I believe, which kind of signpost you to some kind of mindfulness exercises. But including this in your daily lives can be really, really helpful. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Linda for the last part of the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Hope. So here's a Slido that we'd be really keen to hear your thoughts on, whether you're a young person or whether you're an adult. What motivates you? What would motivate you to sit an exam or do something that's really tricky even when it's very stressful? Okay, so getting some few now, some of your responses. The end result, yes, a sense of pride, aiming for something in the future, getting it over and done with, that sounds like, yes. Doing it and then having something nice afterwards. Yeah, getting the grades, winning and getting my personal best. So I guess it's about that sense of feeling achievement, isn't it? That you can get when we do things that are hard. Desire to do well, know that it's worth it for the long-term gain. So yeah, holding again those future aims, getting rewarded by how you do at the time perhaps, or maybe there's other rewards that come, I don't know, in your family, thinking of the future. Yeah, quite a few people have talked about just pushing yourself through it to feel good about yourself. Okay, we'll get into trouble in school if it's not done. Yes, so it's a sort of an underlying motivator that doesn't feel such a positive one that might push you into action. Improves oneself. Yeah, not being left out of a social group. Getting paid. Yeah, so there we are. There's sort of financial rewards sometimes that we might use to help encourage our young people. I don't feel I have anything that motivates me, and that's really hard, I think, isn't it, when you feel like there's not those things that are pushing you into doing what you're being asked to do. And we do know that when things feel hard, you know, we need something extra often to help us, to move us forward. Thank you so much for people that have shared with that. Let's just think a little bit more about motivation, especially bearing in mind that last comment that somebody made, that, you know, it's hard to find anything that is the motivator. And, you know, motivation, as this slide says, is really important to us all. It can help us to do the things that are actually hard to do. So it might be that you have chosen to do a job, not because you want to do a job, but you want to earn some money. So doing the job, you're motivated by earning the money. Or maybe you've got mates coming around so that you're motivated to tidy up your bedroom a bit. Very few people actually like tests and exams. So if we can find motivators, then that can help us to push through those difficult things. So one thing for those of you, or those of you who've got young people who are struggling to find motivators, what a number of you have talked about is the value of long-term goals. So having something that you're hoping for in the future that might help you to push through doing the hard things in the here and now, in the short term, as somebody said, for the longer term game. And many of you mentioned about, you know, whether it's a career or going on to further study or on to work, but sometimes it might also just be things like proving to yourself that you can do something, and that may be a very powerful motivator. And sometimes, however, we can lose motivation entirely, even if we've got those longer term aims, because it can feel either too far away from the here and now, or not even relevant what we're being asked to do in the here and now, which can then make it really tricky. And I guess when this is the case, what's really helpful is to think about how we can have some shorter term motivators or rewards that can help keep us going when things are feeling really like, well, what's the point? And so I guess when you've got exams coming up ahead, actually trying to break down what you've got to do. So even if it's sort of you've got a long-term thing you want to do and the exam isn't helpful, finding something else that maybe you value in life, or that you know that the sort of person you want to be, that might help you push through something that's hard. But we also know that breaking down, as I said, into shorter rewards can be really helpful. So thinking, if there's something you want in the future, what can you do that will help you get there now? And that can sometimes be really useful. So if you've got exams way ahead, try and see if you can put in some rewards to keep you going in this whole process leading up to the exams. So it might be breaking down when you're doing your exam timetable or your revision timetable, of working out what am I doing when, and what things I can put in place to keep me going along the way. What bits of encouragement do I need so that I can stick with something that I find either really hard or really boring, or it's just really hard to maintain that focus for any length of time. And so I want to just think with both young people, and then a separate slide also for parents to think about what other things can help with this. But first of all, just the last comment on this slide that I think is really important is that if you can focus on doing what you can do, putting in the work, then focus on the rewards and motivation being around the effort that you're putting in, because not everyone is going to get the same outcome. We know that not all of us will do best in terms of grades and certain things, and all of us are different and have different skills, some of which will never get shown up well in exams. There are other skills and qualities that we have, but in terms of feeling motivation, I think it's recognizing the effort that we're putting in is going to be really key there, to then be rewarded for that effort rather than thinking just about the outcome, even though that's often a really helpful goal to hold in mind for people. But I just want to show you this tower just now, these building blocks. And let's just think about what else might help you prepare for success by actually getting down to doing the study and work that you might need to do for exams that are coming ahead. I wonder how many of you have set your mind to study and then something has got in the way. Maybe you can't find the textbook or the website you're going to use, or the internet's down. The mates have just invited you out, and of course that's always a bigger pull than doing a study for something that perhaps you're not that interested in. Or maybe you've got some other jobs that you're being expected to do in the house, and actually that feels like that's something you've also got to get done, otherwise you'll get nagged, so you need to just get on and do that. It's really often for any of us, and all of us, adults and young people, to have things get in the way of the things that we want to do, especially then the things that we know we ought to do are things that we find hard. So imagine these building blocks are your behaviours, and the top ones will always be the ones that we can get off easiest. They're like our go-to behaviours. They're the ones that we automatically do without really having to think too hard. So what we need to do is think about how you can make study or revision become a go-to behaviour for you. And so how are you going to get it, rather than it perhaps being one of the lower blocks in the tower that's actually really hard to get to and you have to move all the others out the way? How can you get it higher up the tower and maybe right at the top, so it's easy for you to engage with that sort of study and learning without all these other things getting in the way? And I guess what we need to do is think about setting things up in a way that can help study be at the top. So how can you do that? might be something about making sure you're prepared and you've got your study books and things around you and available, so you're not at the time that you're ready to start hunting around everywhere for things. It might be that wherever you're trying to work, you actually need to just try and have a place that stays uncluttered, if that's at all possible, or things that you can easily move on a tray out the way, so then you've got no distractions around you. And that might be whether it's your phone or that's beeping every 5 minutes, or there's other things that you just get pulled to, or you can see that your gaming equipment's just nearby, and that's actually far more tempting to be involved with than doing study. I guess it's getting the study to the top of the tower might also involve making a plan around your revision time, and having a visual planner so you can see and you worked out what you want to do when. And I guess a key thing with that is to remember to be realistic about what you're planning, because so many revision plans can very quickly fall flat because there's too much that you're trying to cram in a short amount of time. So actually being realistic and setting rewards within that plan is going to be really key to make it doable, especially if it's something that you've planned over quite a period of time. So making sure that you still have breaks, relaxation time, and as Hope said, sort of time to be sociable, we know is really brings down and helps us to relax. So these are really key things to work out to help you to get study higher up on this tower, this brick tower, easier to access without all the same things that normally get in the way. I've got a slide now just to think about parents as well. And I guess for you as young people, first of all, I'd say remind your parents and carers or other adults in the home what you need to help you to manage. So you also need a good working environment. You need some space where at all possible, and ideally no interruptions in the times that you're studying. So if you tell your parents and carers what you need, then they will be better able to support you. So getting your parents involved to help with time management skills, or think about how they can support and encourage you, and tell them what helps and also what doesn't help to motivate you. I guess that's key, because sometimes parents can have their best efforts to try and do the right thing, but might not be getting it right at all for you. So you need to communicate with them to help them to work out what's right. Okay, and let's just think a little bit more about parents and carers. How can you help get study be one of your child's go-to behaviours, and how can you stack the deck in favour of that they do want to do, even if there's other distractions on the way that come along? I just want to talk to you a little bit about reinforcement, because we know that this can be really powerful behaviour. Science tells us that reinforcement can increase the frequency of a behaviour. And so actually, if we can try and encourage the behaviours that seem to be helpful to support it, in supporting our child to do the study that they're trying to do, then that's going to be perhaps a key role for you in a parenting caring role. So reinforcement increases the frequency of behaviour. So by looking out for and positively reinforcing moves towards study behaviour, you can get your the study behaviour block higher up the tower for your young person. And I guess reinforcing small steps taken towards the goal can be really important when big change is needed, and keep reinforcing those little steps will help the whole goal of getting on with study feel much more manageable for your young person. Now, natural consequences can be really important, and if you can allow your child to learn from natural consequences whenever possible, that's often the best way in which they can do learning. So let's just think about that. Doing well after hard work is a great reward in itself. That's a natural consequence, positive reward for the hard work. Failing a test after not revising is also a natural consequence for inaction. which can help a child to realise for themselves that they actually need to change their behaviour to get a different outcome. And that can be really hard. It can be hard for your child. It can be really hard for a parent to watch that happening. But what we do know is that allowing our children to learn from their mistakes can actually be far more powerful learning for them than us telling them what we've learned from our perceived wisdom. So I guess one of the role of parents, of adolescents in particular, is to help our young people become more independent learners. That's a life skill, and part of that is working out and trial and error, allowing trial and error for what does and doesn't work, so they can work out for themselves what is possible and the way they want to do things. So you can really effectively support them by perhaps helping them even, review and consider where things haven't gone wrong, not at the time, but after you've sat with them and listened and help support them if they're feeling distressed, help them to then think about maybe what they might do differently another time if they're not feeling able to sort of think ahead to that themselves. So another important thing I think that's on this slide is about the value of positive praise. Positive consequences include praise, which we can give freely, and what we know is that immediate praise that's really specific to notice what you're praising. So specifically, you've done really well for getting down and doing your half an hour study that you planned, even though your mates were asking you to go out. That specific praise in the moment is the most powerful. And we also know that in terms of giving consequences that are positive as well as praise, and that internal reward that your young person can have when they've put effort into something that they find hard. We also know that other positive consequences that you can give might include just giving extra time and attention to your young person, finding out, making extra time as a reward for when they've got on and done some tasks. So it might be a trip to a shopping centre or some money. It might be choosing a meal or a film that you want to all watch together at the family. You're giving them the choice, like as an extra reward, if that's not something that they normally do. No point offering a reward which is something that's already available for them, because that won't be an extra motivator. But often we find that additional reinforcers will help motivate your child to spur them on when they're finding something hard, whatever it is. Okay, I'm mindful of the time. We've got a few more slides, so I will move through as quickly as I can. Apologies for those people who can't stay on past 7 tonight, but just to say, we do have the recording that will be shared, and so you'll be sent that out in the next couple of weeks. Okay, so let's just think briefly about some quick wins on exam day. I've going to talk through a range of options very briefly, but all of these options are things which are really important to support your young person to practice, or you as a young person who's listening, having a go at regularly yourself, for them to be actually useful to use at times when you're really stressed. So you want to learn the skill in advance so you can access it in the moment. Let's have a look at some of these. But first, let's just have a think about what helpful things you've said to yourself before an exam or stressful event. And this links into one of our first of our quick wins. So let's just hear which helpful comments you have said to yourself in a stressful situation. Okay, you've done everything you can to prepare for this. Just do what you can. Okay, your best is good enough. I've done what I can. You've got this. Okay, I can do this. My parents will be proud. Fight the exam monster. Okay, just try. You can cry when you get home. A real mixture here, aren't there? It'll be okay. What's the worst that can happen? So some are encouraging ones, some are sort of motivational ones, it will just be over soon. Is that sort of, you can get through this and you can do it. Yeah, 10 seconds of bravery. It's not the end of the world if things don't work out. So trying to bring some perspective, that comment in isn't it, on a difficult situation where things can feel so big in the moment, and yet we know in the experience of time that one exam is not such a big thing overall, but it of course feels like that in the moment. Okay, so thank you. So all sorts of different ideas of what you might say to yourself, or you might encourage your young person to say, a young person might say to themselves. Let's just have a think a little bit about self-talk. So it's really common for many of us to have very unhelpful thoughts that we can get caught up with saying about ourselves. We can easily be very critical. And you might find your mind saying unhelpful statements like, I'm going to fail, everyone's going to do better than me, I'm no good at this. Those are common thoughts that many people have shooting through their mind again and again, especially in difficult and stressful situations. These thoughts, if you go back to in your mind that cycle that Hope talked about earlier, these unhelpful thoughts actually feed that anxiety, that stress cycle that she talked through, and can be really unhelpful in helping us actually manage better in these situations. But instead we can do something different, and some of the things that you put on the last slide, some of the things that you say to yourself can be really helpful ways of helping us to manage better in stressful situations and break that cycle. We know kindness, being kind to ourselves, can stop stress from spiraling. And that can be really critical for helping to change the sort of root of what's going on in us in a situation when we feel very stressed. So we'd encourage you to have a go at just thinking about one or two of those helpful self-talk statements, either on the slide or some that you perhaps seen on the screen, or perhaps there's some that you haven't used for a long time or you'll hear somebody else using. Those can be really helpful. You can pop them on your phone as a reminder, have them in your pencil case, or have them in your room. Those sort of helpful statements that can encourage you with what you're doing rather than criticize yourself. Okay, let's just think a little bit about imagery. Images are a fast-track way of getting information to the brain. Famous athletes use visualization before competing, and it's been found to be really successful in helping them with belief. And what we want is you to be able to think clearly when you're in exams. So actually, if you can do things to calm down your system, you'll be able to access clearer thinking. And if you feel more comfortable or confident in what's possible for you, that can also really make a difference. So actually, if you have an image of yourself doing something successful, or feeling good after doing the exam, it might be an image of something that's a sort of peaceful place, or something that's relaxing, something that can calm you. Having images like that readily available can be a really nice quick win for an exam. Actually, you don't need to practice too much in advance. You can just make sure that you're prepared and have got that either on your phone, maybe printed out on your wardrobe, somewhere where you can access that image easily, just to remind you of what you are able to do, what you can manage, and also to calm you. Another quick win, breathing. So breathing is often talked about as something that people can manage when they're stressed, but I guess that earlier clip that you saw really mentioned the value of slow breathing for helping our body to calm down. Research says that 3 minutes of deep, slow belly breathing can significantly reduce and bring down our heart rate and blood pressure. And then that sort of panicky sensation can start to settle. So again, we can think more clearly. So box breathing, you can see these next couple of strategies that I'm talking about. You can search them and you'll find them on the internet. Lots of video links around these things. But box breathing, where you breathe in for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you hold for 4. And then you exhale for 4 and you hold again for 4. And the idea of this is it slows down your breathing, and you follow the shape of a box. So it helps your mind to focus. And I think there's lots of other ideas on this slide of other things that you can do to make it seem perhaps more fun with younger people, or people that engage more in physical ways of managing doing an activity. But this sort of breathing can be really powerful as a way to just help manage in the moment if you've done the practice beforehand. So I'd encourage parents to think of how they can support their young person to do this. And some people, as Hope said, use apps to help with this sort of practice that can be really helpful. Grounding is another technique that draws on all the senses to try and help people, connect people to the here and now. So when you feel overwhelmed, some people feel very disconnected to reality. And so bringing them back into the present moment by using the senses can be an also really simple, powerful, discrete activity that actually you can do wherever you are. And this might just involve looking around you and thinking about, what are 5 things I can see in this room? A picture, a clock, headphones, a glass, and a plug. And then I might be thinking about, what are 4 things that I can feel in this room? Well, I can feel the seat of my chair. I can feel a book that's in front of me. I can feel my fluffy pencil case. And so then you go through, and by focusing your mind in the here and now, it takes away from the difficult thoughts that are causing the stress and the uncomfortable feelings, and focuses back to now. Okay, I guess just thinking about some other things that's really important as we're just finishing off. Remember the support systems that you have around you as young people. You'll have potential of having support from your family or family friends, from people within school or other activities that you get involved with. But we've also just added on Kooth, which is an online wellbeing support. If you don't know about it, go on and have a look. You can register yourselves, and then you can make contact whenever you need to. And this can be a great support for young people. Young Minds also has a chat and text service, and they also offer a parent line, which people can find really helpful to use at times when they need some more support. And just thinking for parents about how you can help your young person, remember to ask them about how you can support your child best. Yeah, think about the aim of a parent being to encourage independent learning. Remember that there's lots of pressures of your young people in school, and think about your own pressures and stresses, and not passing those on to your young people unintentionally. Remember, your young people may have different values to you, and if you can negotiate, knowing that you're trying to support an adolescent young person in learning about how to manage these things, if you could negotiate a balance between work and other important things in life, then that's going to help really make a difference for your young person. And just lastly, be mindful of the environment that you create at home. So we know that for learning and for thinking and for developing well, having a calm environment to live in makes such a difference. And I guess that's where you can be mindful of what's going on for you, and how you can support your child in the best way. And so here's just a summary. You can't stop the waves, the stress and the pressures that can come up, but you can learn to surf. I hope that this has given you some ideas of some ways to support your young people going forward. We've got some resources here that we will share with you, some specific things that you might find helpful to look at. And I'm also going to move us forward from this slide. And just to hear from you about this session. It's always helpful for us to know how you found the session. And then we've just got one last slide after this that we'd appreciate your staying for if you're able to. Thank you. That will just continue. So it's really helpful for us to just see this as we go through into the next slides now. And finally, it'd be really helpful just to hear if there's a couple of specific things you're each planning to take away from this session today. What we know is that helps the person writing it down to actually really hold on to a couple of the key things that they want to remember going forwards. That can be helpful for you. It's also really helpful for us to just sort of gauge what things you found useful. Just to say, while you're thinking about those things, there are a couple of extra slides that will be at the bottom of the slide deck when they're sent to you. And those slides, I guess, again, to be just some things around study skills, which we guess that your schools are actually helping your young people to work on. But we just wanted to include a couple of things there for you. Okay, so be a guide and not a manager. Yeah, and that's really hard, that sort of translation from your child moving up into independence. Food, sleep, and taking a break. I'll be more mindful and try and create a calm environment. Mindfulness and supporting exercises and keeping calm. Yeah, yeah. How to keep my child calm and guide them. I'm really sorry, we can't see question and answers. It's not something that we can access within this forum. So that's why we haven't answered your questions. I apologise for that, but it's unfortunately the webinar platform doesn't allow us to see any responses from people. That's why we have the Slido.
I think it's the Slido that has the Q&A embedded within it. But we can't see it come up as it's going live, and unfortunately we haven't found a way to disable the Q&A on Slido, so it's a bit confusing. So yeah, apologies for that. The other thing I was just going to say whilst people are writing is, obviously, if you are a parent or carer and your young person hasn't watched this, just a reminder that we'll send that recording. It'll be on YouTube, and it may be something that's really helpful for them to watch as well, so everyone can be on the same page.
Thank you. It's really useful to see some of the ideas and the thoughts that you're going away with from this session. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. And as I say, apologies again for overrunning, but I hope it was worth you staying on a bit longer to get a few extra tips. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.